Welcome to our ECG webinar on using Wingman to bridge phone conversations into CRM systems. I'm Mark Lindsay, and I'm joined with my colleagues, Matt Keithley and James Puckett. I'll ask them to introduce themselves here in just one second, but we're happy that you're with us today. Wingman is a new software product from ECG, which can be integrated with enterprise applications, and we're going to give you a great example of that with the HubSpot CRM for today. But I will start and ask Matt Keithley if you can introduce yourself, and then James Puckett if you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Matt Keithley. I'm a special projects developer at ECG, and I've been kind of the primary developer on Wingman, so I'm happy to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm James Puckett. I'm the president and CEO of ECG. Been working with Matt and Mark and others to develop Wingman, which we're proud of how far it's come in such a short time, and we're eager to show it to you. So we go back to Mark.
Thanks very much. So we three are inventors on this software product. We'll talk a little bit about the intellectual property protection here pretty shortly, but I want to just start talking about how humans interact through conversations. We as humans were made for relationships, for sharing, for telling stories, for making plans with each other, for getting help and giving help. For sometimes just for working together to build great things. But too often our technology and our conversations just don't connect. Sometimes you'll be working on something and you find yourself having to effectively feed the technology. You're having to fill out forms and type in things that you just talked about. The fact that we've brought voice systems into the internet era doesn't mean that things are connected very well. So what if we could connect our technology and our conversations, just at the right time? So instead of having to retype important things, our technology could help us with that. It could connect the crucial information to just the right places so that we don't lose the details, so that we can have important conversations about business deals and we don't lose track of those details that we talked about. Just in the past 3 hours in America, we've had enough business conversations on business phone calls to fill up an entire new Wikipedia. It's an amazing number of words and information. And we know that most of that business information is not making it into the business systems where it really belongs. So we're ECG. We want to help you harness the power of conversation for your business. We're the engineering firm that poured the first hosted PBX platform used by Coca-Cola Enterprises. That was a great project that we did in collaboration with others. We worked with Verizon and BellSouth to create the One Talk service, which is still sold today as a major product offering. And we've been able to work with many other enterprises and cloud service providers and government agencies than we're going to have time to talk about today. And what we want to help you as service providers and enterprises to be able to connect the powerful business technology that you're already using with the voice conversations that are already happening. And we call that Wingman. So Wingman connects conversations and business applications like never before. And we're going to give you a good example of that from something that we all do, and that's sales. So suppose that you are a business leader and you want to know how sales are going, but your sales force takes calls, has meetings, they're driving to and from conferences, and the CRM is basically out of date. Your dream is to be able to check the CRM and know how deals are going. So here I'm in the Wingman interface, and you can see previous sales conversations are summarized. So these are phone calls that have come in or gone out from your sales professionals, and we can see these calls collected and organized for us. We can see a summary of those conversations. So not just the raw transcript of the conversations, but the actual summary of the conversations. That gives you real power to quickly capture what was talked about. So we're going to demonstrate this, and I'm going to ask Matt to give me a call. So
Sure.
Matt, tell me when you're ready.
I'm doing that now.
Got your phone, all right? Hello, this is Mark.
Hey, Mark, this is Matt.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. Hey, I wanted to talk to you about a project we've got going on.
Oh, do you mind if my phone system takes notes on this?
Sure, that's fine. So, we do carnival foods. We're looking at getting into the barbecued cotton candy business.
Oh, so this is a totally new project, correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's going to be the next big thing at state fairs all over the country next year.
Well, can you tell me more?
We are looking for a cotton candy machine intended primarily for outdoor use at barbecue style events, including backyard gatherings, church or community events, and small outdoor festivals. The unit must tolerate heat, dust, light wind, and intermittent use without requiring constant adjustment. The machine will be operated by non specialist staff, so simplicity, robustness, and safety are more important than maximum production speed.
Well, I'm sure we can help you with that. I can get you a quote on that right away. I'm going to need you to send me the specifications on your cookers. Is it okay if my system texts you some notes to remind you of what I need?
Sure, that'd be great.
Well, thanks for the call. I'll get a quote to you as soon as I get back to my desk.
Thank you. Thanks.
So now as the call finishes up, we get to see a transcript. You can see it here in the view. In a few seconds, we'll get a flow that really captures that call. And then we can see a summary of the call in a familiar bubble interface. So this is the familiar iMessage-like interface. And this is really meant to capture the content of this business call in a way that anybody can use and is find very familiar. So our focus is on efficiency and effectiveness for business professionals, such as your salespeople. You can also you can read through this, scroll around, scroll back and forth. You can see a summary of this call, and so you get to see the details here, either in the transcript form or the summary to tell you what's really going on and help you kind of understand what's really needed as the next step. You can also search your phone conversations. So if there's a particular thing you're like, I can't remember who called in about the cotton candy machine or something, you can search for those particular things. But so now we've got a recording that we can read. We've got notes on this. And we've made this available for ordinary sales professionals. So not necessarily just your compliance team, because often when you have call recording systems, it's really only focused on compliance. But we really have something that's meant for everyone to be able to get maximum usability out of their calls, to be able to go back and keep track of their work and not lose track of those important details that we talked about. But we know that having a recording, even a summary, isn't enough. After that simple conversation, we need to be sure and capture that sales conversation. And today's call recording systems, they largely mean that you have to go and you can get a call recording and then you can copy that information or transcribe it yourself into your CRM platform. We need to get the information. We need our technology to help us get that information from the place where that conversation happened, and we need to get it into our CRM. And so we're showing this transfer of information from the phone system to the CRM is just one of the powerful examples of what you can do with Wingman. And I like to call it CRM magic. When we look at our CRM in HubSpot, we can see that Wingman has actually created a brand new deal. It's going to pull up here in a second. You can see the deal information. And then you can see every word of the deal. We're going to expand it here, and you can see the summary of the deal, the thing that we talked about, and then you can see every word of that conversation. So maybe this needs to go to an engineer and they need to look at the details. What exactly did they ask for? Well, you can see those exact details there. That's all captured for you. It's pretty amazing. So the next time you're working on a sales project and you are wondering about some of the status of information about that deal, then I hope you think about whether you have something like Wingman to capture that for you. And it's not just about HubSpot. HubSpot, with Wingman, you can track data in other modern CRMs and systems like Zendesk and HubSpot and Salesforce. But you really can't just have an AI system like Wingman record every call indiscriminately. We know that we have an obligation to protect the privacy and respect the wishes of the people that we talk to. And that's why we are proud to have what we call privacy first AI. What this means for us is that Wingman can be deployed in private infrastructure, your own data centers, or even your customers' data centers. They don't need necessarily a massive server to manage their calls. but they can keep that data local to them. So they have the power of AI, but it doesn't necessarily have to operate outside of their control. They can have full control over it. So this guarantees that no information is leaking out for them. And it can help answer a lot of those questions like, is this AI secure and safe for my organization? Wingman also ensures that no recordings are made without permission. When Matt and I just talked, we talked about getting explicit permission to record and take notes. I actually asked him, is it okay if my phone system take notes? That's one of the features of Wingman, to detect whether you actually have permission to do that exact thing. So without that explicit approval, Wingman won't record anything. And Wingman fully supports encrypted storage so that you can meet the security requirements of your client's industry, so sensitive details can be recorded and stored in the way that you need. And it's not just about loading the CRM. We believe that the value of voice AI should really go to everybody. We're so accustomed to hearing about AI that primarily only benefits one side. So, in a lot of systems, you can have an assistant for you that doesn't do any good for the other side of the conversation. So what we want is information that's valuable to everybody. So if you ask it to in the conversation, Wingman can send a text message to the caller to remind them about the call. So imagine you're a sales professional, you receive a call from a client like the example I have, and there's some information we need. We want to keep in touch with them, and one simple way of engagement is to send them notes on the call. And the most natural way to send notes to most people is through texting. So Wingman could do that for you. If you ask it to, like we did in the conversation when I said, is it okay if my system sends you a text? Wingman did that for us automatically, just based on that conversational element there. So everybody knows what's next. Everybody knows what's needed for the call. Now, if you're like a lot of business users, you don't live necessarily in texting every day. You live in a system like Microsoft Teams or Slack. So Wingman supports enterprise collaboration. What that means is that Wingman can capture the content and the notes and actually deliver them into the messaging platform that you need. So here I'm showing an example of using Slack to do that. So I'm a Slack user. We use Slack at ECG. And so I would like to get a copy of my calls and communications there in Slack. Wingman sends notes to the tools that enterprise can actually use. So we're showing this example of Slack, but we've also got capabilities for other systems as well. So maybe you want to get notes through email. A lot of small businesses operate in email and spreadsheets, so email is really the ideal way to get it. Perhaps you use Microsoft Teams, or maybe just the SMS interface for getting your notes is really the best mechanism for doing that. And so Wingman has capabilities available for all of those things. Another technology that's really important that's up and coming is VCon, virtualized conversations. So historically, conversations were happening and they were ephemeral, so that information would be lost. There's no real strong record of them. Now, if you're a service provider, you're accustomed to keeping call detail records, maybe some logs. And if you have call recordings, maybe you have an audio file. VCon is a structured way of organizing that information so that it can be passed between applications or it can be archived. So one way you can think about using Wingman would be if you already have a call recording platform, and that call recording platform is there for your compliance purposes, but you want to start to add new business value to your end users. So you're doing the necessary call recording that's required by law in your industry, but you actually want to get this capability of interacting with your CRM as well. So VCon would be a very logical format to take that information from the call recording platform and bring that into Wingman. That would be one use case. Another use case would be in another direction where you take the call recording or the transcript out of VCon in VCon format and you send it to a VCon conserver. So the VCon conserver is a platform that would store that VCon and then it would keep track of any future copies of it that are made so that an auditor, a regulator, can come and look at what's in that VCon conserver and confirm whether or not other copies of this call recording are present. They may be able to confirm things like whether the person had given consent about recording the call. Things like that can be captured in the VCon and stored in the VCon conserver, and there are active projects to do that. There's a lot of interest among regulators and attorneys to be able to provide safe ways of managing the storage and then later the destruction and expunging of that sensitive information on phone calls. And the VCon infrastructure integrated with Wingman is a good and logical way of doing that. So just to summarize here, and then I'll have a few questions from you guys. I'd welcome questions in the webinar, but also I have a few questions to start off with for James and Matt. But just to summarize here, Wingman allows you to view and search your phone calls in a way that's never been available to business users before. It works with any UC or PBX platform because we use standard interfaces to collect this data to make it available. You can locate it where you want to in cloud or private AI. So you can put this in your cloud provider of your choice if you want a rapid deployment with the highest grade of AI processing, or if you want a private AI implementation that runs in your own rack in your own data center, you can do both of those. Wingman integrates with HubSpot and Salesforce and CRMs of that like. It integrates with Zendesk and SMS. And we really want to make it available to custom enterprise software. So what are the types of enterprise applications in your business market that you can use that Wingman could help pull in all those details and ensure that they don't get lost, ensure that it doesn't require typing and there's all those errors due to summarization that humans are doing. Capture that information from those calls and get them into the enterprise applications that you need. So that's Wingman. I'm going to stop the share and go to James with some questions about this. Like I mentioned, James and Matt and I were co-inventors on the Wingman technology. And I want to start with you, Matt, from your, James, from your perspective, James. What's a real non-theoretical value that a voice service provider, a VoIP provider, a UC provider gained by adding capabilities like this AI voice, rather than in addition to just having a feature checklist to put on their marketing site, what's something that's real value that a service provider gets by adding this?
The feature checklist part is important. I don't want to lose sight of that. Being able to say that you have, AI voice integration, is I feel like important. We're dealing as of late, especially on the traditional telephony side, with sort of some dwindling user counts and customers that are looking for more full-featured options. A lot of enterprises have moved to Teams or Zoom or Slack or whatever for their enterprise communications needs, and the telephony is sort of a bolt-on in that case. Uh, having the ability to do sort of AI voice in a traditional telephony environment, I feel like that really it'll help make the traditional telephony that for those folks that feel like it's still important, it'll help make it sticky. Especially as we're able to sort of build their own integrations and make it do a lot of the same things that the newer sort of newfangled applications can do, again, like Zoom and Teams and whatnot. But having AI in the network enables really, a lot of creativity in, how you market to your customers, how your customers market to their customers by enabling you to do uh, event-driven, AI workflows. And so Wingman's not it's not a single product with a single feature. We can do transcripts, although we can. Um, but having those transcripts and then turning those into business events that you can integrate with other systems. That's really the sort of where the rubber meets the road. So, having the feature checklist is important for marketing and whatnot, but, having the ability to really meet those customers' needs to keep them from, looking elsewhere to fill those gaps, I feel like is important.
Yeah, I think that's really it's really interesting as we've talked about other integrations outside the classic CRMs. We've talked about things like tools that help the construction industry building data centers. And I have a colleague who it's a CFO at a construction company, and you're walking around at these sites, and you're walking around in mud that's 6 inches deep, but you're taking phone calls about important details about the actual construction project. So being able to get that information out of an audio call and load it into the project planning tool without having to manually stop and go back to your truck and pull out the laptop, that could be important to a lot of industries. And in our research on pricing, what's the revenue addition for this kind of thing? We've seen pricing of $20 per user per month up to $60 per user per month being established in the marketplace for adding different kinds of AI features where basically you're taking value information out of those calls. So there's some real revenue potential here for service providers to add capabilities, even if the price of the UC user, the hosted PBX user, is dropping down. Adding a real functional capability that gets into the vertical market capability has really started to become a lot more interesting. Now, Matt, I want to go to you on the implementation and the engineering of approach. One thing that was kind of visible for our viewers, if they were watching really closely, was the two-phase transcription approach. So we saw that first transcription, and then we saw a second
Mhm.
transcription in the bubbles. Walk us through how those phases differ and what technical or business problems that separation solves.
Sure. Yeah, so sometimes people see AI products as just kind of a black box, but if you kind of open up the black box, there's actually, multiple parts here that are taking place, and there's more than one AI model and type of AI model that we're actually using under the hood. So we have, as the audio comes in, the first type we're using is a streaming transcriptioning model. Um, this uses less GPU usage than like a what we do later in the post processing and in the what we call diarization, which you're doing speaker detection. Um, but it allows you to see what's happening live and effectively live. It's with just a few about 50 milliseconds, you're going to see what's being said on the screen. And so these models are not as accurate as what you get in when it looks at a larger chunk of text, which makes sense. This is just the way it is when you hear, when you read or you hear someone, you have more context over time. And so models that use all of an audio call at once are going to be more accurate. But you can see the results right away, and that's kind of nice to see what's happening on the call. You can, if you're on a long call, you can look back to see what was said. So it can be very helpful. And then after the call's completed, we then run that through another pass. Um, and this is going to be a higher quality post processing, and that's when we do the speaker detection. That's when you see the um, different bubbles for the speakers actually appear. And so these actually have different scaling as well, so you can better gauge if you have a higher number of concurrent calls or you have fewer calls but they're longer. These can scale differently, and so there's some benefits in having them separated like that as well. Um, and that's distinct from the AI that we're using then to make decisions with the calls that we have. So there's multiple AI models we're using as well as different types of models that are being used in the process.
Interesting. And those can run, you can deploy that both in private infrastructure and in cloud infrastructure. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So that's cool. So James, back to you. When operators introduce AI into voice workflows, what are some of the important data security risks that they might underestimate or maybe not come to mind? And what are the safeguards that really matter in practice?
Um, Safeguarding these calls and the transcripts is incredibly important. Nobody wants to be in a position where there's any sort of data leakage that might leak personally, identifiable information, HIPAA protected information, bank accounts, things like that. And we talk about those things on the phone fairly regularly. So when we designed Wingman, I mean, really security first was the watchword. We put an awful lot of time into making sure that that data, whether it be the raw audio or the transcripts, it is able to be processed in a location of the provider's choosing. Um, And so as you mentioned, Mark, earlier, that means either in the cloud, if that's what you choose, or within your own data center. Um, and so that allows control by uh, by the service provider, and potentially the customer, to sort of decide. By having that flexibility, you get to decide where you want to put that processing, which for some can lend some additional comfort, that they were at least given the choice. We didn't have to send everything to Zoom for processing, in somebody else's cloud somewhere. Um, but then, even after you sort of make the decision as to where you want to do the processing at, you still want to make sure that those raw, text file, the raw audio and the text files are stored in a secure way. And so we've put an awful lot of work into making sure that there's as few places where there could be any sort of data leakage. So, very little storage of audio in databases. Very sort of short-lived storage of the text, and all of that. And any place that it is stored, it's stored encrypted. And any place that it's transferred encrypted. So, if you end up having to, it's sort of regardless of what security framework you use, whether it be, you know, IRS 1075, or, HIPAA, or, any of the other sort of security, frameworks and audit tools and regulations that you have to meet. We're able to check the check boxes for security. Um, the sort of the knowing where your data is at, knowing where it's going to be processed, and knowing how it's going to be stored, really does sort of, it's a freeing sort of thing, in that once you don't have to worry about those things, you can focus on, well, how am I going to use that data? Um, am I going to store it in a CRM? Am I going to store summarized versions of it in a CRM? Am I going to, process it for security before I send it off? So, having that security first design mentality really, I think, allows us to not have to fret as much after the fact about, what are we going to do to protect these files, because they're protected by default.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for those details and helping think through some of those questions. And I think those are the kind of questions that everyone looking to deploy AI in their business applications are going to be thinking through. And it'll be important because those points, like you mentioned, of if there's transient storage of audio, then there's a question of custody and securing that and possible data leakage, and those are the kind of interface points where um, the problems can occur, where APIs can be potentially attacked. And so designing in that security, minimizing those storage and minimizing the movement of data, um, will be on everyone's mind, I think, as that comes along. I'm going to jump to another question that came in from one of our viewers. There were mentions of different AI models. I mentioned the example of construction, which is a very different lingo from healthcare, and which is very different from finance, et cetera. Are there different models for verticals as well? And I'm gonna, either of you guys who've looked into these things, have you seen models that were focused on a particular vertical market that know the terminology? He mentions healthcare, and I know that's one where there are a lot of specialized terms that don't occur in everyday global English usage. So it's a really interesting question, I think. Do you guys, Matt or James, have some background, or have any familiarity with the different transcription models?
Yeah, there are models. There's a variety and that have been specially trained specifically for terminology. So there's these. things called LoRAs that you can add on top of your transcription models as well that kind of give hints. You can think of them as dictionaries of terms that can help hint towards specific fields. If you have terminology or businesses, things like this that can help. Um, we do support um, swapping out our transcription models at both at the streaming layer as well as the post processing layer, as well as the LLM, like decision making layer. All of those can be changed if there is a specific model or provider that works better with for a specific industry. So we can do that. There are other points that need to be taken into consideration when you're considering which models to use. We have some defaults, but you need to consider things like which languages do you need is a big one. Is English only required? Because if so, you can save compute time and have a higher accuracy rating. Um, you can also consider accuracy versus size of the model. So there's a fall off, diminishing returns as you increase the size, but it gets more and more accurate. So you don't just want to say, I want the most accurate model. You're trying to figure out which one matches, like is good enough for what you do. Um, so that's what you're looking for is something that like matches what your industry needs as well as is good enough at the price points you're looking for. So
Hmm.
hopefully that helps.
And
Yeah.
those models can be, as Matt sort of alluded to, those models can be swapped out either at the system level or at the profile level, the user level. So,
Hmm.
he mentioned explicitly language. The idea is, well, if you're principally an English only business, then going with a model that supports just English will, make it faster, make it cheaper. But if you are bilingual or trilingual or multilingual, there are models that you can use that will still handle that transcription, and we can swap those out on a per user basis. So, when they call that customer that's paid for the multilingual support, that's going to cost you more, right? Because it's going to require more memory, it's going to require more CPU, and therefore you're probably charging them a little bit more. You can swap that out. Along those same lines, you could also swap it out for, like you said, a more medical savvy model, or maybe it's the same foundation model, but it's been
Yeah.
augmented with the it's been augmented with some of the medical hints.
Right.
So we
Fine-tuned for
really
the
do
special terminology.
have that flexibility.
Hmm. Another interesting question that came in was about this notion of not recording unless explicitly agreed to. So we did this verbal agreement. So basically, Matt in our test call opted in to being recorded, and so Wingman processed and retained that call recording. He
Hmm.
mentioned there are some states that still require only one party authorization, so you don't have to have, both sides don't have to agree to it, and therefore you don't technically necessarily have to get approval for the other person. And so the question is whether that's configurable. Could you set up Wingman to just go ahead and record without requiring that opt-in phase? Is that a possibility architecturally to allow
Yeah.
that kind of thing?
You can do that. Certainly, it's all configurable, and you can do that. But it's still hard to know whether or not the caller lives in one of those states. You can do things like look at the telephone number, but if they've got an Oregon telephone number, but they happen to be in California and they call into your Pennsylvania call center, then the California folks they're going to want two party notification. And so, if your legal department is comfortable that things like telephone numbers are enough to sort of decide where they're calling from to have just single party notification, then certainly that's an option. We do control sort of how tight it is. We can have default on and you sort of opt out. We can have default off and you opt in. There's a lot of flexibility there, um, in that.
Yeah,
in that layer.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say that we also try to store the consent reason. We mentioned VCons earlier. VCon has a whole section on consent, and we are leveraging AI to pull that out and give us, here's why I think we can record this call,
Hmm.
and here's the little snippet as what they said. Um, and like we said, right now it defaults to we don't record unless I have a valid reason, and here's the consent reason that this model believes that's the case. We are relying on that, but it's been consistent in our testing, and we store that so you can see that for the future. Like this is why it made this decision.
I want to move to kind of another topic on implementation. We've talked a lot about transcription models, and that's really crucial to what we're doing in this product. And what a service provider who deploys Wingman is going to have a lot of flexibility there, and depending on their environment. But in deployment, there's a lot of talk about containerized deployment models. I mean, classically, you'd have a server for doing things, and then it became virtualized, and now a lot of service providers are moving to Docker containerized environments, and I know Wingman is designed to run in these Dockerized environments. Matt, why is containerization essential for deploying a system like this in a service provider or a major enterprise network?
Um, Probably the largest reason is scalability,
Hmm.
and being able to use resources that a service like AWS is going to provide you more on demand. So as your call volume increases, more Kubernetes pods can come online dynamically to use those resources and those GPUs. Now, uh, specifically for transcriptioning, I do think we are getting to a very, very high quality, to where there is a limit to where once you hit perfect accuracy, kind of like bowling, once you hit the max, you're at the max. You can't improve it anymore. And so what happens is it becomes cheaper over time. So I actually expect that specifically for transcriptioning models, we're going to see a gradual decreasing costs and for these. Um, and so, although there's trade-offs, if you decided to run this in your own system instead of somewhere like AWS, I do think that gradually you'll be able to support more as these models become better. This is a prediction for me; it's not a guarantee, but that's kind of what I see in the future. But for now, running these things in something like Kubernetes is going to leverage the ability to not have to have those GPUs tied up all the time, and you can just use them when you need them.
Hmm. Yeah, well, you heard it here, Matt Keithley. Guaranteed, absolutely. Transcription is going to be getting improved and lower cost over time. So, Matt, I'll hold you to that. Um, so, the James, over to you. A question is that related to how Wingman interacts with the enterprise application. So Wingman allows these different connections. So we've got basically the connector into HubSpot that we demonstrated here. Different applications can be activated per conversation rather than having the same AI applications activated for everyone and every call in the system. Why do that? What problems does that kind of architecture solve? And that's really a big difference from other products that we're seeing come out on the market where there's a strict workflow. If a call comes in here, it's just going to go through these exact phases, and it's kind of a workflow that's configured for everyone. What architectural problems does this selection process solve, and why does that flexibility matter operationally?
Um, there's a lot wrapped up in that question. We're the way where we live in the call flow, um, means that we have, at least in the default setup, we have visibility to all of the phone calls, right? But if you're a service provider that has, you know, 5,000 users, max 25 phone calls, simultaneous at any given time, like you can sort of run that through a couple of servers and probably be fine. Like you can record every phone call, you can transcribe every phone call, you can handle that, no big deal. Um, but then when you start adding in the additional business logic for doing the HubSpot integration and or the Slack integration and or the text messaging. Like all of those things take a little bit of horsepower, right? And again, when you're 20 phone calls, it's probably, that's just one more server, no big deal. But when your service provider scale, when you're 2,000 simultaneous phone calls, 5,000 simultaneous phone calls, you start to think about, well, how is this going to work? Do I want to fork and every single phone call in and out? Maybe, probably not, but maybe. And so having the ability to pick and choose which phone calls get treatment, initial treatment for initial phase during the real time, and then which phone calls from there end up with a summarization, and which phone calls from there end up with diarization, and then which phone calls from there end up with HubSpot integration versus text messaging. All of that flexibility allows you to scale the hardware um, necessary to provide the service based on sort of who's signed up for what service. And we mentioned sort of the difference between um, English only versus English and Spanish, or English only versus the medical version of the transcription. Those are different things that you can swap out. And we have this concept of a profile, which allows us to say, well, for this particular user, they've signed up for English only, and they've signed up for HubSpot integration. You might have a different one that, for that user, for their telephone number, it's a medical office, and so they need the medical transcription, and they don't have HubSpot integration, they have Salesforce integration. So having this very flexible, modular, profile-based concept allows you to really, really focus where you want to put that horsepower, because the horsepower means either dollars or hardware and power, hardware, power, cooling, it's all expensive. And so being able to really dial that in and tune that based on what the customer is willing to pay for, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, that's some interesting points there. I know that in some cases, most large service providers already have a database of users and features, and basically what their customers are subscribed to. And I know one thing that you guys have talked and worked out really hard on in Wingman was ensuring that if a service provider has that in place, that they don't need to go and swivel chair over to the Wingman interface and activate these things. The concept is that uh, they would provide a profile server interface using an API, so that that existing subscriber database can already signal to Wingman what we wanted to do, what they wanted to do in that particular case. So if they've got this package and it's the HubSpot package, or it's the XYZ enterprise vertical integration, once that feature is added on to that user, when that call comes in, Wingman can consume that from the provisioning database that already exists, and then automatically know the right things to do with it, rather than having to separately manage it. I can envision a lot of users who um, uh, may not regularly use the web interface that we demonstrated there because they live in the enterprise application already. We don't need
Right.
to give them another website to go to. They need to just add a better use of the existing enterprise application. That profile server based approach with the API capability to interact with what's already existing gives them some power without having to add another provisioning interface.
That's right.
So Matt, we've talked a little bit about how you can deploy Wingman in both private and cloud infrastructure, and we've used AWS as the example there. And
Mhm.
you've got huge advantages, like you said, Matt, about like, well, you've got elasticity. You can scale up in AWS. So if you start off and you've got a steady load of a couple of calls, and then that burst to 10,000 calls, well, you can do that with Kubernetes and AWS, and they'll give you the resources, but you don't have to pay for it continuously. So for
Mhm.
organizations who are thinking about, so that's the elasticity piece. But for organizations thinking in general about doing this in private infrastructure, and the advantage of private cloud or private servers, and public cloud platforms like AWS, what are the key architectural or security or operational, any other considerations that they would think about and drive that decision?
Yeah, there's a lot. Um, so obviously, with a provider like AWS, there's so many features that you're going to get, not for free, but you're going to get without the work. You're going to pay for them, but you get them out of the box. This includes everything from your database scaling to your messaging scaling to um, all like we talked about GPU usage. Just you get all those things, you pay for them, but you don't have to worry about them, and that's a pretty big deal. They have things like multi-region support, which is something that you might not have if you have just your own data center. So there's scaling and multi-region and like connectivity things that are really you get in AWS. I would say that we haven't really had any issues with that in terms of like the way that the calls go over the network. Seems to work pretty well. There is some things you have to do for setup, but it's fairly simple. Um, However, you can see a need where you might want to be running this in your own network for just maybe if you're thinking security, I want to keep everything in house. You know where all the data is, and that's fair. We can actually you can run Wingman, the whole system, um, in a single node if you really want to. You can put if you want a small version that can just do a couple of calls, you can just launch the thing in a very, very small containerized setup. That's not probably what you want to do, but you can. So it can be scaled up and down. I would say with security, there's kind of sometimes a misconception that you are more secure in your running it locally, but you do have to realize that AWS has and other cloud providers, they have full teams that work constantly on security, and um, it is probably the most secure place on the internet. So, in terms of if you're concerned about your database being breached or something, um, having your database in somewhere like AWS is about the safest place you can be. Now, we do encryption in place as well, so we're like having extra precautions that we're trying to take. But if you were as secure as AWS and had all the features of AWS locally, you would just be AWS. So that's just kind of the way it is. Um, so they're going to keep uh, things up to date as well. If you've used it for a long time, they're going to force you to keep constantly do these updates, which you don't have to do if you're running it locally. Now there are some downsides. Um, it's harder to do things like do packet capture. It's harder to see inside. It's not impossible, but it's just more challenging. So you have to be aware that there's going to be some extra hurdles that you're going to have to deal with if you want to just kind of see what's happening. I mentioned earlier about GPU costs. I actually do think, I know I don't want to make too many predictions, but I actually do think buying GPUs for transcription is one of the cases where maybe this is a good idea because I do think we're getting to a very, very high quality where you might just be okay with this. You might not actually need it to get much better than where it is. And that's not the case for like text to voice or LLMs. We can see that continuing to increase in the future, but transcriptioning specifically you do hit a perfect recording at some point where you go, yeah, every single word is accurate. And so this is a case where they are going to be getting better and more efficient over time. So there's a lot of trade-offs here. So I don't think there's a right and wrong, but that's kind of what I would be thinking about.
We got another question on the way that Wingman connects to other applications. So we gave an example of the verbal authorization to record. And the question was about could the tool take voice commands? So if we're doing a new enterprise integration, say XYZ, data center construction management tool, and it's got all this, internal stuff. During the call, could there be new voice commands or hints in the keywords or client names or things like that during the call to help Wingman identify where the data needs to go, whether to go to the correct CRM or external system, so that it gets processed properly instead of, for example, always going to HubSpot. And I'm gonna dip in here, take this question, and give you guys a chance if you want to add more. That generally, yes. If you've got a Wingman user and they're in their profile, they have the integration for XYZ integration. Then in that XYZ integration, it's going to have access to that improved transcript. It can process and look for what those hints are. And so if it turns out that the it includes the names of building projects, particular project codes, or maybe just the name of a construction site, and it's got that, the integration could specifically look for those. Go to the enterprise, let's say the construction management tool, find out the names of the projects, look for the names of those projects, and identify what's being talked about here. Or it could look for the telephone numbers and find out which projects those are associated with. That'd be another application where, without having to even listen for the words, they could use the information, the metadata, to help to route and determine what's going on. Oh, this phone number that's on this call is from the client, or maybe it's the materials delivery company associated with this project. And then it could go load that data automatically. So in general, the answer to this question is yes. Each enterprise integration can have its own methods of determining which project or which deal, or whether this is a new deal that's being discussed verbally, and then route that data appropriately. You could even send it to an intermediate phase where you allow someone to review it before it goes into the final record. And that would be, of course, something that could be added as part of that enterprise integration, so that instead of loading the data directly into the system, it goes to a place where somebody can look at it, check to be sure this looks right, and then basically approve it for addition. And that's been a discussion that's come up in the context of emergency services, where there's a discussion about AI systems that can consume the VCon flow from the platform, and then it gets analyzed, and then basically there's a decision maker on, do we actually need to send a fire truck? That kind of thing needs a human judgment step. But you could have multiple parties who have access to that, who could contribute to that decision making based on the information that's received verbally and then processed. James, I'd like to shoot a question to you. Other industries don't have call recording today already. We've talked about some that do already. They're already doing the call recording for compliance. But in other industries that don't have call recording today, can you envision places where you could see this kind of application being more valuable down the road?
Sure. I mean, we talked about, construction, and, somewhat related. You and I talked a few weeks ago. I was at a dinner party, and we were just talking about AI. There's sort of this ongoing anti-data center thing going on in South Georgia where I live. And so, AI came up, and, one of the guys that was standing there, he was talking about, he used to have a service that he paid for, that, when new customers would call in, they'd get routed to the service, and the service would sort of interrogate the customer about, it was a handyman service, right? Interrogate the customer about, what can we do for you? He was, relating that, as an example, they had a customer call, looking for to have gutters installed in their house, right? And so, the live person, is having a conversation with them about this stuff, and the the live person sort of had to have enough wherewithal to be able to ask all the right questions, and then appropriately record the details and send it off. And he was saying, I recently switched to a different service where it's an AI that's actually having the conversation, and they he was being honest, and honestly they ask far better questions than these human call center people, because the AI sort of understands about gutters. How many feet? Are they going to be aluminum? Are they going to be vinyl? Are they going to, what color are they going to be? Do they need a downspout? Are they going to need rocks at the bottom? Do you need leaf covers? All that. Like, it'll ask all those questions, and then provide a summary right at the end. That's the whole deal. Now that's not exactly what Wingman does, right? And Wingman's not like active in the conversation. It's not asking questions of anybody. But I mentioned that to say, I think a lot of places, almost any place where you're where you regularly have conversations that involve dense detail, where getting that detail on paper is important, could use services like this. So, construction, handyman, doctors, lawyers. I don't know about dentists, but lots of different places where it matters, where the detail matters, and where not having recorded some particular detail could either cause a mistake, cause a loss of business, cause a loss of revenue, or loss of life. I think any of those sorts of things where we're having something that is listening to the phone call that can note those details and then store them for future reference would get a lot of value out of something like Wingman.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. I agree. So, James, you alluded to the common deployment model for Wingman that we've seen and discussed, which is where a particular part of the network, you've got the PSTN connectivity, and you're making all of those calls available to Wingman. So Wingman has access to all those calls. That would be one model. I've also talked with a service provider about a model where they use their voice application server, in this case Broadworks, and they use a feature code to turn on call recording. And effectively that would connect Wingman to that call, when they
Yep.
chose to. And that helps them solve, they're operating in California. That helps them solve a problem there where they
Mhm.
get verbal consent and there's zero recording until they actually get real opt-in. And
Yep.
then they start the recording. And in that case, you don't need to say it again. You just start the recording at that case. But the question here we got was whether it's useful or whether it's, we should, in a case like this, record only the inbound calls or only the outbound calls, or should they be selected on a per user basis? Have you guys given thought to, what the useful ways of deciding which calls and which directions should be recorded? Maybe an
I
opinion.
don't. I mean, I'll let Matt answer, but I'm gonna throw out my 2 cents worth first. I don't know that we care. Like the system itself doesn't really care where we sit in the network as long as we have, a two-way audio stream. So you could only do it on PSTN side calls. You could only do it on access calls. You could do it on both inside, access and network side. You could, as you mentioned, use the application server if your application server supports SIPREC. You could, use the application server to decide which phone calls to record. It really depends on the application. It depends on, what you're selling and who you're selling it to, and how you want to pitch it to the customer. What I was pointing out was that even if you record, even if you offer for recording every phone call, we have the ability using the profile in the profile server to be able to decide, okay, I was offered this phone call, but Mark is a cheapskate and he's not paying for transcription. And therefore, I don't need to spend cycles doing the real-time transcription. I don't need to provide a call summary. I don't need to do any of that stuff. I can just stop that call recording process right there, and save the resources. I don't have to have them tied up to only later decide I didn't need to record the phone call.
Mhm.
And so it really does provide a lot of scalability, especially in large networks, to just fork those phone calls that you want to record.
Yeah, I was going
Well,
to say something similar. We have like right as the call comes in, we immediately request out with the caller and call ed, and you can immediately either accept the call or not. So that's a decision that you can make. Currently, we don't care if the caller or call ed has been set up to receive calls If your user has been set up on either side, then we will receive it in our default implementation, but it's specifically designed that you could change that.
Great. Well, I appreciate you guys sharing about Wingman today. It's been exciting to build this and roll this out together. Look forward to talking to anyone about the opportunities to enhance voice service providers or bring this directly into enterprise applications. Contact us. You got our contact information. If you're watching this webinar, we're at www.ecg.co. Thanks very much, Matt and James, for your time today.